When people think about the fall of Rome, they usually imagine barbarian invasions, legions disbanding, or emperors being poisoned in lavish palaces. But empires do not collapse only because of external attacks. The real collapse comes from within. And the most insidious force that accelerates that collapse is often money. Rome did not fall only because of invasions or corruption. The decisive blow came with the collapse of its economy. And the lessons drawn from that collapse are still valid today for every modern economy that thinks, nothing will happen if we just play a little with money. Now, let's rewind the film. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. When it was first minted around 201 BC, it was almost completely pure silver. It was accepted as a reliable currency both inside and outside the empire. Soldiers were paid with it, merchants demanded it, and ordinary people saved with it. The denarius was not just money, it was trust in metal form. The power of the empire and the value of its currency were tightly connected. As long as people trusted Rome, they also trusted its money. But ruling a massive empire was extremely expensive. Soldiers demanded wages, roads and aqueducts had to be built, and wars had to be financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was struggling to defend its borders both internally and externally. Taxes were no longer enough to cover expenses, and so the emperors turned to an ancient method. They hollowed out the money. They devalued it. Because raising taxes always caused public backlash, instead they began reducing the silver content of the denarius. The numbers tell the whole story. During the reign of Augustus, 1st century AD, the denarius contained 95% silver. By the early 3rd century, under Caracalla, it dropped to 50%. By the mid-3rd century, under Gallienus, it fell below 5%. What was once nearly pure silver had turned into a bronze disc with a thin silver coating. People could see the difference with their own eyes. And then came the biggest consequence: inflation. Prices skyrocketed because money no longer had real value. The price of a single measure of wheat could suddenly increase tenfold. This was not a theoretical problem. It was a disaster that destroyed the daily life of the Roman people. Soldiers demanded higher wages because they could no longer survive. Merchants refused debased coins and demanded gold or barter instead. Local economies reverted to direct barter. As trust in the currency collapsed, emperors tried to fix the problem by minting even more cheap money. But the more money they printed, the less each coin was worth. In short, a perfect vicious cycle. This cycle repeats itself in every major inflation crisis in history. During the period known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, 235 to 284 AD, Rome endured nearly 50 years of invasions, civil wars, plagues, and economic collapse. Emperors were overthrown and killed within months. Behind this chaos lay a bankrupt financial system. The value of taxes collapsed, farmers abandoned their land rather than pay, and trade networks disintegrated. The state resorted to desperate measures like price controls and forced labor, none of which worked. In 301 AD, Emperor Diocletian issued the edict on maximum prices, fixing the prices of over 1,000 goods and services. Violators were punished by death. But once money has collapsed, you cannot fix prices by law. The black market exploded, and official trade nearly stopped. The people learned a brutal truth: broken money cannot be fixed by decree. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius entirely. Around 312 AD, Constantine introduced the high-purity gold solidus, which would endure for centuries in the Eastern Roman Empire. But the West was already lost. The collapse of the denarius had rotted Rome's economic foundation from within. Armies could no longer be fed, trade ceased to function, and faith in the state vanished. Rome's fall was not a single event, it was a long process of decay. The collapse of its money was one of the sharpest turning points of that decay. So, what does this tell us today? It tells us this: a currency that is destroyed also destroys the empire behind it. Rome believed it could deceive its people with debased money. Today's governments are doing the same by printing money, manipulating interest rates, inflating debt, and melting it away through inflation. The outcome is always the same. The people pay the price, wealth disappears, trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson the hard way. If we ignore it, we will face the same end. Every major inflation crisis in history follows the same formula. The state debases money to cover expenses. The elite protect themselves with real assets. The public grows poorer. Rome was only the first great example of this collapse. Let's fast forward to the 20th century, Weimar Germany. After World War I, Germany was drowning in debt.
After World War I, Germany was drowning in debt. The government tried to solve the crisis by printing money. By 1923, hyperinflation exploded. A loaf of bread that had cost 1 mark before the war reached 200 billion marks. People carried their wages in wheelbarrows. Retirees who had saved for a lifetime became poor overnight. Money lost all meaning, and this economic devastation paved the way for the rise of Adolf Hitler. Zimbabwe. The same story repeated in the 2000s. The government printed endlessly. In 2008, inflation reached 89.7 sextillion% per year. Prices doubled every single day. In the end, the country was forced to abandon its own currency. And what about today? In 1971, Nixon completely removed the dollar from the gold standard. Since then, the dollar, just like the Roman currency, has been based on nothing but trust. And, as you can guess, governments couldn't resist. National debts exploded, money supply expanded, inflation became permanent. The purchasing power of $1 in 1971 is roughly equivalent to $6 today. The paper is the same, the look is the same, but the inside is hollow. Governments present inflation as success. Wages are rising, they say, but prices rise faster. They market debt as investment. They brag about rising stock markets, while most people can't even afford to own shares. Just like the Roman emperors, they say nothing has changed. But with every banknote printed, value is silently drained from people's pockets. What makes today especially dangerous is this. This time, the problem is global. Rome's collapse was regional. Weimar was national. Zimbabwe was local. But today the entire world uses fiat money, runs on massive debt, prints trillions at the first sign of crisis. The next great collapse will not hit just one country. The shockwave will strike the entire world, and the ones who will pay the bill will not be the rich. It will be the ordinary people, those who live on wages, those who save, those who retire. So what should we learn from this as individuals? Inflation is not an accident. It is policy, a silent tax that has destroyed empires for 2,000 years. Real wealth is not on paper. It is in real assets. Land, skill, production, labor, resources. Never assume stability is permanent. The people of Rome never believed their money would one day become worthless. Neither did Germans, nor Zimbabweans. History shows us this clearly. Financial systems collapse slowly. And then all at once, when money loses its reality, society begins to unravel. Contracts break, trade stops, armies dissolve, governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians finish the job at the gates, but the real destruction always begins in the treasury. Final word: history does not repeat itself exactly, but if you don't understand it, it crushes you. Rome's monetary crisis was not only about bad rulers, it was a lesson about how power can rot money itself. And that lesson is still valid today.